Headlines in Fine Print with host Dion Williams, President and CEO of Piedmont Advantage Credit Union. This is a podcast that will have you asking all the right questions and learn more about the financial products and services that best fit your needs. Monthly, Dion will help listeners navigate the headlines in fine print and make sense of the financial service promises and offerings. Headlines in Fine Print with host Dion Williams. Brought to you by Piedmont Advantage Credit Union.
Hello and welcome to Headlines in Fine Print with Dion Williams. I'm Dion Williams, President and CEO of Piedmont Advantage Credit Union. If you have listened to a previous episode of Headlines in Fine Print, you know that we like to look at the headlines, which is the high-level information that may have the shock value or something that catches your eye or your attention. But we drill down to the fine print because that's where the details are, and that's where we want to make sure that you're getting the best information possible to make you a well-informed financial consumer. And we've covered topics such as buy now, pay later. We've talked about buying a house. We've talked about buying a car. And we've even talked about paying yourself first, establishing an emergency fund, and basic budgeting. So everything that we do is geared towards equipping you to be a better financial steward. Now, today's topic, we hope, is one that helps put more money back in your pocket, and that is on the practice of surcharging on plastic card transactions. Now, when I say plastic card, that's debit and credit. Now, I want to differentiate there because I think at the merchant level, there is some confusion. So on a debit transaction, there's two ways it can run through. You can enter your PIN, which is your personal identification number, the 4 digits that you would key in at the cash register. But there's also when you swipe and sign, that's also a debit transaction because it's going through your debit card. So the differentiator isn't whether you enter a PIN or sign. The differentiator is if you use a credit card or a debit card. If you use your debit card, it's a debit transaction. So why does that matter? Well, it matters because you may come across a merchant that has a posting that says they're assessing a surcharge on a card transaction. Now, this came on my radar several weeks ago when I had a member of the credit union, also a board member, saw several merchants. He was out of town and he saw this and then noticed it locally too, in which debit and credit transactions were all being assessed a surcharge. A credit card transaction surcharge is permissible. A debit card surcharge transaction is not permissible. Doesn't matter if you PIN or sign, a debit card surcharge is not permissible. So I think there's some misinformation at the merchant level on this topic. Now, it's a good thing that merchants can take the plastic card because remember there was a time where they were more cash oriented and it was very difficult to compete with the big box retailers. So it's a good thing that there's some providers such as Toast and Square, Clover, PayPal. They make these merchant services available so the small businesses can compete and accept cards. That's a good thing, but I believe that the merchants are getting some bad information from the merchant service providers in terms of how they assess these charges. So again, if it's a debit card transaction, they should not be assessing a charge at all. If it's a credit card, they can assess a surcharge, but that's capped at 4%. But in the experience that our member shared with me and what I've also observed in my own experiences, 3% is the most common surcharge. So let's recap real quick. You have credit card transactions and debit card transactions, and it's not defined by how it goes through. It's defined by it's a credit card or a debit card. If it's a credit card, you can't assess. You can assess a surcharge. If it's a debit card, you cannot, and it doesn't matter if it's a PIN or you're signing. So why is there a difference in terms of one can and one can't? Well, there was a piece of legislation a number of years ago called the Durbin Amendment, and what it did was regulate debit card interchange. So when you swipe your card, debit or credit, there's interchange income, which is basically a fee. Some of it goes to Visa or MasterCard or whatever quote unquote rails that the transaction is going through. Some of it goes to the financial institution. So Piedmont Advantage Credit Union, for example, receives interchange income. What do we do with that money? Well, I will put your mind at ease. It does not pad the bottom line. Actually, it's a cost of offering a card program to our members. So there's obviously fraud with card programs. There's the cost of issuing the cards, and financial institutions have among the tightest data security standards in the world. And rightfully so. Financial institutions should have, the utmost scrutiny in terms of how we protect the data of the consumers that we serve. So a lot of the interchange income goes towards the cost of administering that program, making sure that our program is safe and secure, and that we are doing all we can to prevent fraud impacting our consumers. Now, on the merchant side, and this would be your big box retailers, they would like to see the interchange capped. But here's the catch. The retailers have a different set of rules on data security. Now think about this. There's been some very high profile data breaches at big box retailers. Those were not financial institution breaches. Those were retailer breaches because, again, their standards for data security are not as high as ours as a financial institution. Yet, when it happens, what do? Well, you contact your financial institution, right? You contact your credit union. And what do? You're our member owner. We're here to serve you. So we're going to make you whole as quickly as we possibly can. So we're going to give you that provisional credit or outright credit to your account to make sure you're made whole as quickly as possible so you can continue with your life. And then we go on the backside, and this can take weeks, months, or even years in some cases to try to recover from the merchant for the loss that happened on their end. But again, we put getting you whole up front, and then we go back on the other side to try to recoup that money from the retailers where the breach occurred. So that's one thing that we'd like to see. There's a current push in Congress actually to extend the caps that currently exist on the credit programs on interchange to the credit side. And I think that would be a very bad decision because the cost of administering a card program is greatly assisted by those interchange fees. And if they further cap those without putting some tighter data restrictions on these merchants that are asking for interchange to be capped, I think that the merchants are asking for their cake and they want to have their cake and eat it too, whereas they're putting all the burden on the financial institutions that are doing all we can to make the members whole, prevent fraud, reissue cards, do everything we can on the consumer side. So we hope that the legislation to cap the credit card interchange the way it's currently capped on the debit card is something that is not a successful endeavor in Congress. But that's kind of the origin as to why the debit card surcharge is not permissible, because the interchange income on it's already capped, and putting a surcharge on top of that makes a tough situation even worse. But again, the credit card surcharge is permissible, but I would look for that to change if this legislation goes through. But again, I'd rather see Congress efforts go more into tightening data security standards to make this a safer place for all of us than capping the interchange income, because that still does nothing for the consumer at the retailer level. Okay, so we've talked about the debit and credit card transactions, and that surcharges are permissible on credit but not debit. We've talked about the legislative origins as to why it's not permissible to assess the surcharge on a debit and why it is permissible to assess it on credit. And now let's talk about what do you do if you're in a situation where you see this posted. So you're at a merchant, maybe it's a restaurant or a local business, and you see this posted that there's a surcharge on debit and credit transactions. As a consumer, what do? Well, first of all, and this is what I personally have done, talk to the person at the business, ask to speak to a manager and owner and explain the situation. And in a couple instances, I have directly observed that the business owner was unaware of what the laws were, and they were very much going on the guidance of their merchant services provider. Again, that's your Clover, PayPal, Square, Toast, the merchant service providers. They set them up, and the business trusted, their expertise in setting it up. So receptive in that regard. But Beyond that, what can you do? You can contact Visa or MasterCard directly, or whichever quote unquote rail that your transaction's going through, whoever's supporting your card. You can contact them and report the merchant and the transaction. You can contact your financial institution and dispute the charge. And I know if it's a $10 or $15 charge, 3% doesn't sound like a lot, but just imagine if everybody's doing that, that's a lot of money. So you want to make sure it gets addressed that way. So you can dispute the charge, you can report it to Visa or MasterCard, and then they can correct how this is being done at the merchant level, and which may even include restricting their ability to process transactions if they don't correct it. And then you can also contact the Attorney General's office, and I can say with certainty that in North Carolina, the Attorney General's office is receptive and proactive when you report an instance of these charges being improperly assessed to consumers. Very pro-consumer in terms of being your advocate on that, and that needs to happen. I mean, you definitely need to report this to your financial institution, Visa or MasterCard, and the Attorney General's office, because the practice is not permissible. It is against the law. So thank you for tuning in today to Headlines in Fine Print with Dion Williams. And I know today we really got into the weeds, but I think there's some valuable lessons in all of this. On the whole interchange issue, I think there's some confusion and misinformation out there as to what does interchange do. If from the retailer side, they're going to say, well, the financial institutions use it to pad the bottom lines. But the truth is it's very much used as cost to administer the card program. Would like to see tighter data standards on the retailers that the financial institutions welcome and already adhere to. I hope you've learned today about the type of surcharges that are permissible and are not permissible in terms of when you're out shopping and out in the community, what charges you should or shouldn't be assessed. And all of that goes into making you a more informed financial consumer. Be sure to tune in for future episodes. We thank you very much for your time and your attention today. And if you're a member of Piedmont Advantage Credit Union, we thank you for that. If you're not, we invite you to join. Learn more about us at www.pacu.com. And you can also find Headlines in Fine Print with Dion Williams on Spotify. Thank you and have a great day.